You know, January really was that month. I was like 31 days in the month, first month of the year. I had some time off from work. I was like, I was going to get every ounce of reading done. And if you saw my January TBR videos, I had like 15 books all set out to read in January. And then the reading slump hit, and I read 4 books out of 15 books. I really am crushing this booktube thing, aren't I? Hello everybody, Nora back again. Like I said, I only read 4 books in January, which makes this is probably going to be the shortest wrap up I'm ever going to do on my channel. So you know what, enjoy the moment, live with it, embrace it. At least I've learned to do that, because every time I think about the fact that I only read 4 books this month and I had like half the month free from work, I'm in pain. The very first book I read, which was technically not the first book I started in January, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. The very first book I read this month was Here Comes the Sun by Nicole Dennis Benn. This is a book set in Montego Bay, Jamaica. We follow the story and lives of 3 generations of women. You have Dolores, the mother, Margot, the older sister, and Thandi, the younger sister. And each one of them experienced hurt and pain and assault, all 3 of them, and they deal with it in different ways, and it's a character-driven story. Each of these women, we could see their trajectories, we understood where they were coming from, we understood the reasons why they made certain decisions, and this book turned out to be a social commentary on colorism within, Black communities, and how that relates to exactly what the perception of beauty is within those communities, and how some people end up having to make decisions that they wouldn't have otherwise done, just to be loved, to be seen, to be accepted, especially when you're in a community that favors light skin over dark. We see that abuse begets abuse, and how mothers can turn good little girls, loving daughters, into monstrous things because of abuse that they have not been able to deal with in their past, and abuse that was also wasn't checked by their own parents. So it's all about the follies of parenthood, and how we create monsters in our children because of the monsters we are dealing with internally. And it's also a social commentary on sex work. How in Montego Bay, Jamaica, for example, one of their major exports is sex. The girls who do not see a better life for themselves turn to selling their bodies as a way to survive, and how slowly, bit by bit, you lose who you are, you lose your connection with your family, with your friends. You are willing to sacrifice everybody in order to come up to top of the herd, and how the people you mow down along the way in turn end up passing that along as well. It was a book that was slightly depressing, but in a way in which it was real, because these are real life situations. These things happen, and it's heartbreaking. I enjoyed every moment of this. I gave this a solid 4.75 over 5 stars. It's a book that I will probably not read anytime soon, because I'm not gonna lie, this book had me depressed as fuck, but it was so goddamn good, amazing, fantastic. The second book I read this month is Beast Made of Night by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is a fantasy. This is a YA fantasy inspired by Nigeria, in a city where scenes take the form of sin beasts, and mages call them out because when left alone, they fester in the bodies and the souls and spirits of the people who have committed that sin, and eventually those ones waste away. So if you have enough money, a mage will call out your sin, which will take the form of a sin beast, and they would hire an Aki who are sin eaters to fight the beast and eventually eat your sin. So in the city of course, if you have enough money, you never have to feel guilty about whatsoever sin you've committed, because there's always an Aki there to eat your sin. But that in turn meant that the Akis were treated as dregs of society. They were considered as othered, as less, which is ironic, because what they do is essential for Kos to thrive. But the people of Kos did not really see it like that. And we follow our lead character, Taj, who is the oldest of the Aki. And I say oldest because the boy is 17, but the Akis in Kos don't live for that long. So he is considered one of the oldest and is one of the best. He's cocky, he's arrogant, he's strong, he's powerful. But unlike all the other Akis around him, the beast, when he has eaten them, over time, those bees that are eating take the place of tattoos on the skin of the Sin Eaters, which I found really, really amazing. But Taj, unlike other Akis, his own sin spots haven't faded. In fact, they never fade, they just stay there. Which means he has to battle, he has to deal with both the odd that the Akis, the younger Akis give him because he's one of the best, and also the hatred and scorn gets from like the other people. But he handles all of that by being humorous, by being cocky, by not taking things too seriously. Taj can laugh at life, but at the same time, he's also amazing, he's kind, he loves and supports his others Akis, although he does not really let them know because he wants to keep that old image. The premise of this book sounded fantastic. I was really looking forward to reading it, and then I read it, and although I had really, really high expectations for it, it did not really deliver onto it. I felt the pacing was off. I felt that there were lots of parts where it dragged and lagged. Although I was invested in Taj, I didn't think that the villains were well developed. I had problem with the fact that there were just a huge slew of secondary characters who eventually faded away into nothingness, and you're like, okay, why were these created in the first place? Like, this book would have been fantastic if it had just been done well. Unfortunately, it was not, and for that reason, I gave it 2 stars out of 5. The next book I read was Crown of Thunder, also by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is the second book because The Beast Made of Night was a duology, and although I preferred this book better because we had set up the stakes, we knew who the villains were, even though they were still paper thin, but they were still paper thin, I'm not gonna lie. But eventually the story was better, the pacing was better. The character motivations were a bit more clear, even though in some parts they were cloudy. There was still some villains that just popped up out of nowhere, and I really didn't understand what they were doing in the story. They were not really needed. They were not fleshed out enough for them to make much of an impact. But the finale for this, I actually did like how it built up to the climax, even though I did have some questions, and I thought that the ending still left a lot to be desired in my book, because the ending, the last page or two was really, really rushed. And I did not really get as much closure as I wanted, but that was just a personal thing. If you like your stories a bit more open-ended, you probably might enjoy the book. I gave this a 2.5 stars because, like I said, it was better than Beast Made of Night. But I did recognize that it could have been even better. And there were a lot of questions that I had in the first book that were answered in this one, which was another reason why I gave this a higher rating. Oh yes, and if it is that you really love math theorem, you would enjoy this book because the magic system was all based on math theorem and algebraic formulations. It was really awesome. I'm not a fan of math, I wouldn't lie. This thing lost me some parts because I was like, why am I saying math in a book I'm reading for enjoyment? I thought the magic system was really cool, and I enjoyed it. I actually did a whole long ass review of this series, so I'll link it up somewhere over here. You can check it out if you want to. But yes, this was the third book I read in January. And the last book I read in January, actually, to be honest, I started it in January, was the first book I read in January, and I got so bored. I went into that was probably what kicked off my reading slump, because I couldn't read for like 2 weeks, and then I picked up something else, and then I came back and I read it, and I didn't even finish it in January, if I'm being honest. I actually finished it on the first day in February, but I'm still putting it part of my wrap-up because no, I do not want to talk about this book in February. And that would be the last book in the Grisha trilogy, Ruin and Rising by Lee Bardugo. Like I said in my TBR, I actually do prefer Ruin and Rising to the other books, just because the first book was set up, the second book was filler, and this was everything was rounded off well, at least as well as it could be done. This was the final showdown. Alina was going off against the Darkling. Mal had learned to keep his mouth shut and to appreciate her, and which I actually enjoyed, because when he's not really talking and being an annoying brat, on the few times when he opens his mouth, it actually made a lot of sense. Like, there were instances in this book when I was like, holy shit, Mal, wow, so wisdom, you know her. Like, I was just surprised. I'm like, did this boy get a personality change? But I guess after he became so shitty in the second book, the only way it could go was up. So I actually enjoyed Mal in this book. I found him fairly decent. He gave decent advice. He was supportive of her. He was pushing her to be better. He had accepted the fact that he was not going to get the Alina of his past. Like, he had to make do with the Alina in front of him, the powerful sun summoner who was becoming a saint to the people, who used to be a soldier, or who is still a soldier in her own right, and who had to make difficult choices and sacrifices. And he was learning to accept that, which I was I was shocked. I'm like, are you serious? Mal? Wow. Okay. I'm surprised. The Darkling was the Darkling. It was still like, I understood why I was like, oh, cute, attractive in the first book. And it's like, by the third book, I was just like, oh, god damn, annoying. And then there's a part where when they go into the fold, Alina talks about how the fold makes her think of darkness, isolation, being alone, being unseen, and like being so visible and at the same time unseen at the same time. And that quote hit me because that was a perfect understanding of who the Darkling is. Like, I know she was talking about the fold, but I just saw that if the fold was a representation of who the Darkling is, then it only makes sense that that isolation, that darkness, that feeling of aloneness and strangeness that the fold is a representation of the inner thoughts and feelings of the Darkling. And I understood that because, you know, Bagra was explaining to her how her son became who he was, and you know, you realize that he was a child born of circumstance. You know, the isolation, he had too much power, he had a mother who could not trust anybody, he had a grandfather who was mad with questions and powers and created some things that should never have been created, who dabbled in sciences that should never have dabbled in. And you just understood who he was and where he was coming from. And the short story at the end of this book, like the first time I read this, I did not even know that there was a short story. I knew there was a short story at the end of Siege and Storm, which was the Tailor, which I enjoyed, was the best part of this book. But I did not know Monster in the Wood was in here until Cindy of Read with Cindy mentioned it. And I was like, wait, there's a novella at the back of Rain and Rising. And I read it, and that short story gets like a 4/5 stars because you understood who he was, you understood who the Darkling was, you understood why he became what he became eventually. Because you have to remember that the Grisha were hunted, they were killed, they were reviled. With the Shu, they became experiments. With the Vegedans, they were just witches that were burnt at the pyre. Even people that were vegetarians, like Zoya said, would burn you on the pyre just because you're a Grisha if you're in Vegeta. And I just, when you spent lifetimes and you've seen your people haunted over and over again, what you desire is power to control the narrative, to keep your people safe. And that short novella at the end of this book and the little bits of him we get along the way helped me see that and helped me understand him some more. And I understood, and I could make peace with the ending. I felt a bit sad, but I understood why it ended that way. And I'm with Cindy on this one. Actually liked the ending of Rain and Rising. Like, reading it on second glance, I liked how each of those things were resolved. I still feel a bit pissed because what happened with Alina, I understood why it had to happen. I understood why that decision had to be made. But I still felt like, you know, taking that route was taking something that was crucial to her, something that she always felt was hers. And I still found it sad, but I have learned to make peace with the ending. I gave Rain and Rising 3 out of 5 stars, and the only reason why it was 3 out of 5 stars because it was 2.75 stars, but then I read The Monster in the Woods and it just gave it that bump. Those were the books I read in January. Crazy, I know, insane. I think I'm getting out of my reading slump, which is having me so excited because February is the BookTube games. Like, this is probably going to go up because we're already in February, and this is going to go up when the BookTube games are started. But I'm Team Kedadam, and I intend to kick serious butts. Let me know if you agree with my thoughts about any of these books. Have you read any of these books? What did you think? Let me know all down in the comments below. Please do not forget to like and subscribe. I make new videos every Sundays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I will see you soon. Until then, stay passionate, love books, love yourself.